Hi, and welcome to Get Real with Mark and Chris. I'm Chris Hill.
And I'm Mark.
You're Mark.
Just
you don't
Mark.
want your last name
Yeah.
included. Now that's our new normal intro.
That's
We just
the
change
normal
it again.
intro.
Every time it's going to
Yeah.
change. So this week we don't have a guest with us this week. But
No tasting. Unfortunately.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. I'm disappointed, but
Probably no tasting next week either.
probably not.
But the following week, we're going to have an amazing tasting. It's going to be great.
Might be more than one.
Yes, that's right.
So what are we going to talk about today, Mark? What's our general conversation going to be?
I think we have some fun, and we dive into property rights.
Yeah, I know I brought that up to you because there was like a local issue that was kind of something that I wanted to talk about. I mean, it's funny because I have so much stuff I want to talk to you about, and we want to sit down and talk about stuff. And like today, I was like, okay, I need to make a note of that. I need to make a note of that because there's stuff that every time I come across it, we need to talk about stuff like that. But
so are you scared to get into it?
No, not at all. I mean, so locally there's I'm not gonna call out businesses or anything like that, Mark. But locally there's a business that the property owner owns the building,
right?
And I don't know all the details, but probably so the property owner wants to sell this property
Yep.
to another organization. And the tenant wants one of the tenants, I'm guessing that's been there for some, is upset, right? And it made me think, at what point, who, as a property owner, what are your rights? If you're given, if it's within the scope of what you're allowed to do with your property, how can a tenant for sake or attempt to prohibit that from happening? You know what I mean?
Well, I think only by the bounds of their lease. Right. So if their lease states that they can be there for a certain period of time,
true.
And
so if you got a 1 year lease,
landlord
you're going to be there for a
has
year.
to honor the lease. But I think that if you're a tenant and your lease is up, you have to come to terms with the fact that at any given time, that landlord can make a decision to sell the property, redevelop the property, ask you to leave pertaining to the terms of the lease. All of those possibilities exist.
Right.
And at the end of the day, that the landlord has the right to do so. Right.
I mean, that's the way I feel about it. It's funny because there's so much, this is that whole public sentiment thing, right? Because, and another example is there's, a project that was just approved in the town of Leonardtown, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually an existing project, but their expansion of the housing project, right?
Yep.
And I started reading through and scrolling through some of the comments.
There's probably some unhappy comments.
There's quite a bit of unhappy comments, right?
Yeah.
And it's part of me is they were planned that way. Those properties were planned to be housing subdivisions for a long time, and it's funny how everybody who's looking for a house wants more houses. They want to find the right house. They want their perfect house and their perfect property. But once they got one, right, they're like, I don't want anybody else around me.
Once I got mine, nobody else can have theirs.
Yeah,
it's funny. That should be the motto for Calvert County. I got mine. You can't have yours. Because it's literally Calvert County. We deal with that all the time. Growth is such a hot subject, and I think at the end of the day, I don't think anybody wants to see a county explode with growth and just have this crazy growth happening. But at the end of the day, there are properties that are zoned specific ways to plan for growth in the future. Their change is going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Shopping centers are going to get redeveloped into gas stations, right? Those things are going to happen, and the owners have the right to do so. The owners have the right to redevelop their property based on what the zoning ordinance allows.
What's there, right?
Now, one of the things that I also don't like is how easy it is for a local government to take those rights away, or a state government at that. I think a lot of people don't know and understand what happened in 2012 with Planned Maryland. I mean, that was the largest land grab by a state in national history, and that's what
even today.
Yeah, even today. So our state did that for us, right? They came down and said, hey, we're going to create this tier mapping system, and if you're not within so many miles of public water and sewer, you can only go to a certain density, and there were farmers and families that own properties that could have been hundreds of houses at one point in time that now can be a maximum, I think it's 7 lots.
A 300-acre parcel can only be 7 lots.
So yes, if it's in a Tier 4 area. So Plan Maryland basically said that these Tier 4 areas are supposed to be like farm and forestry districts only, right? So, let's just say that there's a piece of property in 7th District, right? Or like in Calvert County out towards the 231 bridge.
Got it.
Those are pretty good examples of Tier 4 areas. Rural farming. So prior to 2012, that property could have been whatever the zoning was stated by the county, which in St. Mary's County, it was about 3 acres per. So 300-acre piece of land in 7th District could have been 100 lots, right, back in before 2012. Now it can only be 7. State of Maryland pushed those regulations down onto all of the counties and all of the landowners. So what people don't understand is this is a property rights situation. Like their rights were taken from them based on what was there at that time. And what's really unfortunate about that is that you've got these farmers that have been out there on that land forever that don't pay attention to politics, that don't pay attention to these kinds of things. And now it's like, oh, well, I passed the property down to my heirs. My heirs don't want to farm. This is what I've worked for my entire life, what my family's worked for our entire life. This piece of property was everything that we had. And, 100 unit, 300-acre property, I don't know what that would have went for in 2011, but it would have been millions of dollars more than likely. And now it's hundreds of thousands.
Right.
If that, in some cases, depending on what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's so frustrating because, I mean, it's back to that, over-regulation to some extent. But you said it before. I understand. None of us want the explosion of development, right? None of us want that. We want that reasonable development, right? Not there's so many words for it and all that stuff. But it's funny. There was a conversation today, and this actually a little side note, but. I had a conversation today, and we were talking about someone was bringing up that most of the development of new stuff is in municipalities.
Right.
Have you noticed that?
And then a lot of that's because those municipalities have access to public water.
That's right.
Sewer.
They have their own. Right.
That puts them in tier 1 or tier 2 areas, which are by the state dedicated for higher development. It's also the pieces of properties that make the most sense to develop right now because you can do, multifamily, you can do apartments, townhomes, you can do single families. I know that in Southern Maryland, especially, people hate the idea of multifamily properties, especially Calvert County. Oh my goodness, we had a couple 100-unit apartment complexes spring up, and everybody lost their minds. Which, by the way, it hasn't really changed anybody's quality of life.
May have even made it a little
improved
better,
it for some because there. I know folks that live in those apartments that otherwise I don't know where they would live. They got divorced or this or that happened, and they needed a place to stay that was a little bit more affordable, and that affordable housing didn't exist prior to that. So. Everything has its place.
I'm going to sound like I'm smart here, but I'm really, it's just I happened to read this today. There are 50 million people living in rental properties in this country.
Wow.
And 75 million property owners. Think about that for a second.
Wow.
Yeah. Fascinating, right? I thought that was really fascinating.
So
I just read it today.
2/3 of the country's real estate is investment.
That's right. Yeah, and actually, a little sidebar too. Did you know that 11% of the foreign investors are from Canada, and that's the largest investment group is Canadian?
Really? I would have thought it was China.
I know. They're number 3.
Yeah.
It's it's Canada, Mexico, and China.
So going back to the property rights side of things, I think that oftentimes I find myself advocating for developments, and I feel like, oh, Mark, he wants everything to be developed. No, what people have to understand, what I'm really advocating for is property rights.
Well, right.
I mean, the person has had the right to do this with their property. Now, a lot of folks will say, oh, well, that's just the rich guy. He's done this or had this and did that, and why does he got to keep doing this? Well, at the same time, people treat those folks, right, those folks that, maybe they do have some money.
Right.
But those folks have made major investments in our communities.
Oh, no doubt.
Leonardtown, let's go to that topic. People are upset because development's happening down there. But if development didn't happen in Leonardtown, we wouldn't have First Fridays.
Right.
We wouldn't have the trolley that goes around to those different subdivisions that, by the way, were just built recently.
Right.
We wouldn't have that quality of life. The growth was required in order to provide that. So there's a lot of good things that come from those things.
I mean, I understand. Look, and back to, you can't just have everybody go and crazy doing what they want to do, right? There has to be some semblance of organization and property. There has to be some of that.
You have to control the growth, because you can't grow at a rate that's going to put stressors on all of your public systems and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I mean, it's kind of, but that's the problem I see is, like, I always think of that farmer, right? Like there's many different schools of thought. Like there's, like you said, that wealthy individual that is gonna overdevelop and build and build and build.
Right.
That's that philosophy. And then I always go, it's interesting because I always go to that, that farmer who has been, working at, like, as you mentioned, working that farm for his generations,
yep.
right? Or literally generations. And at some point they say, this is going to be my retirement. They know that, right? I've heard farmers say that. This is my retirement. And then when they're not able to get what they should get for that property because whatever reason, over regulation, whatever it is, or
the community doesn't want whatever's going to go there. I mean, that's a big thing. Like, it's funny because the community always wants what they want,
right?
And they don't want what they don't want. And then what's really ironic, and I've seen this happen in Calvert several times, that people don't want this, don't want this, don't want this, and then the same people are there using that service or business when it's built.
No, that's exactly right. They're in the grocery store.
Right.
They're in and I don't know. And the other part of it is, and they talk about, like, traffic and here's the thing: if you had 200 units, many of those people are tenants elsewhere anyway, right? Like, so you're not going to have an additional 200.
Right.
Property
and now they
owners
actually
on roads,
may be consolidating closer to where they're actually working. Some of them may be biking, they may be walking, like those things may be happening.
And so
like, again, going back to Calvert's a good example. A lot of those folks were already tenants, or they were already living elsewhere in the county. Well, if they're working in Prince Frederick, they were commuting into Prince Frederick. Now those cars are staying inside of that bubble instead of going outside of that bubble. So it's not always the end of the world. Don't listen to all the doom and gloom.
Right.
People should have the right to do what they're allowed to do with their property. And honestly, the allowed to do is another thing that burns me up, because we get people. It can change at any moment. Yep. Right? You get a set of county commissioners that come in and they say, you know what?
We don't like that anymore.
We don't like this anymore. You can't do that anymore. And, again, this is supposed to be a free country. That doesn't sound very free to me.
Well, I mean, look, I also acknowledge that the world changes, right? So rules and regulations that were put in place in 2012, for example, today they may need to be changed or tweaked or updated, right? But when you completely say, whoop, you're out. That's just not right. That's also putting your personal. There's a whole lot of that going on too.
But I think politically. That across the board, we should be creating opportunity for people, not limiting opportunities.
I agree with that.
And I know that that everybody can't just run around and do it. We can't have anarchy, right? But at the end of the day, I think that governments and businesses and citizens, we should be supporting each other and creating opportunities, right? And if you as a community don't like something that's going somewhere, why don't you sit down and really have the conversation with what the pros and cons are of whatever's coming to that area and truly understand the benefits. Right. But I don't think that, unfortunately, Chris, we live in a world that, in my opinion, is not open-minded enough to have those conversations.
No, I think you're right.
I can only hope.
That's why we get real.
Right. That's why we get real. We do it here. We open up the can of worms.
One more thing about that. It's really important for people to acknowledge also that what I find, and I go to you go to a public hearing or you go somewhere and you hear something about some of these things, and you see someone who stands up and they're adamantly opposed to whatever the situation is, and that's the first time I've ever seen them at anything. Right. I truly believe that. If you have a viewpoint and you want to make the changes that are there, be involved, right? For real.
Yeah.
Get involved now before we call it the NIMBY, right? Not my backyard, right? Before that, get involved and make the regulations part of your community. Make that work with people and hear differing viewpoints.
I agree.
Because if I've always said, I can go into a room with my mind set on one thing. This is what my opinion is. I am locked in. I am not changing my opinion. Yep. And I go in and I sit in a room and somebody comes in here and they give me their opinion and you're like,
your opinion changes.
Whoa!
Not everybody can do that.
No, I get it. And you go, you know what? That's a valid point that I never considered, and now I want to be able. I support that idea. I get it, and so I think getting involved early on can change your viewpoint, and maybe you change someone else's.
Right.
You know?
So the answer here is get more involved.
Yeah.
Right? Learn about property rights. Don't be just a NIMBY. You can still be a not in my backyard.
Right.
But get your facts straight first. Have some conversations first. Now, before we wrap up this real quick,
that's fine.
I want to talk about the tenant and the situation that we started with, right?
Yeah,
So there's a tenant in a property. Property's going to get redeveloped. Tenant's going to get the boot. Everybody loves the tenant's operation. Right? And everybody wants to support that. Well, listen, as a business owner, you have to plan properly. So if you knew that your lease is going to be up, you know that there's a chance that you could have to be out. You should be working diligently to extend that lease. And look, you may trust a landlord or this or that, and there might be issues there. I have no idea. But you should be protecting your business. You should be extending your lease so that you can stay there. And if your lease is up, you should always be looking at what other options are on the table. And my thing would also be for the community that wants to support this individual.
Yeah, lift them up.
Support them. Help them find a new location. Help them get them into that new location. Be involved, right? Be involved. That's right. Don't just complain. Don't just get on social media and whine and complain about everything. Why don't you go crowdsource and crowdfund some money to move said establishment to a different place and help with the renovation? Do something good.
Yeah.
That's what
and that's so critically important because just having that support of the community. If you're a business that has that support of the community, it's wonderful, right? Like first of all, you're a business that the community wants. Right? Period. So figure out how to make it work best for you. But you said something, when we were off camera, you said something, businesses have to have a plan. Right. And I think, when we talk to all the economic development people and that sort of thing, they work with businesses to create a plan. If you're in this facility now and your goal is to have your own, brick and mortar somewhere else, right? Then by the way, I know they'll work with you. Yeah. Like they'll work with you and help you come up with that kind of plan. So there are resources available for those businesses.
If there are any tenants that are currently in commercial property, listen, one of the greatest wealth generation items in this world is real estate, right? So if you're not already in the thinking track of being an owner-occupied commercial, you should be. Right. Because that's where your real money is, right? That's where your retirement is. Like you should be planning for those things. I think there are a lot of businesses out there that could afford it that are just comfortable in leases that probably should buy the building that they're in.
Right. So or another building. Right?
Or another building.
Something that works for them.
Or build a building. But be ready.
Right. Be ready.
That's right.
That's right.
Be ready to make some people upset.
Somebody's going to be mad. But. Yeah. All right. I guess with that, we'll wrap this up. And
we're not going to do a fun real estate fact?
Oh, well,
you kind of hit us with
some
in there.
I already gave you one.
Yeah, I like that.
Now I got to find the darn
thing.
The
11% of the real estate in the United States is owned by
Canadian investors, right?
Canadian investors, that's right.
Yeah, so the top three were Canada, Mexico, and China, interestingly enough.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought that was
Canada and Mexico makes sense.
But I'll tell you here's one more little part of that, the same conversation. Do you know that foreign investment amounts to 2.9% of the total investments in the United States?
Wow.
For some reason I thought it would be higher, but
that seems like a low number.
I thought so too.
That's a cool fun fact as well.
Yeah,
well, let's wrap this podcast up.
Let's do it.
All right.
We'll
see y'all next week.
Next week.
Wait.
What?
Where can they find us, Chris?
Oh, I got notes.
I'm going to put you on the spot.
No, not me. That's your job, Mark. I'm sorry, but it's your job. I lost my notes.
You can find us on thebaynet.com/podcast. You can find us on the Baynet's Facebook page. You can also find us on YouTube and Spotify.
And you know where else you can find us? Only because I happened to Google us.
Oh. Google.
I Googled us and found us on Amazon Music.
Well, we must be important now.
I was like, we're on Amazon Music. Look at that.
Check that out.
Anyway, with that, we'll see y'all next week.